So we celebrate the great feast of Pentecost today. We're with the disciples in the upper room. We've been praying and waiting for this Pentecost novena, these 9-10 days since the Ascension. And today, finally, the Holy Spirit comes upon them and upon us. We read in Acts, it's partly the sound of a powerful wind from heaven. There are tongues of fire that separate and rest on the head of each, and they are filled with the Holy Spirit and the gift, the particular gift of speaking the languages of those around them. It's the birthday of the church because the Spirit comes upon the whole community, but it's the birthday of each individual Christian, of you and me, because the Spirit gives us each a new birth, above all at our baptism and confirmation. Most of us throughout the world have been in lockdown now for over 2 months, so you are sick of preachers making comparisons between the scriptures and our situation. Well, I'm afraid it's impossible to ignore today, because there they are, locked in the upper room, trapped together waiting, and now they are set free and sent out. It's impossible, at least in the United Kingdom here, to ignore the connection, because tomorrow is Happy Monday. Tomorrow is the easing of the lockdown restrictions. I won't say the end of lockdown, the easing of the restrictions. For example, we can go out and meet not just one friend, but 6, not just in a park, but in someone's back garden. So I'm going home next week, finally, to see my family up in Hertfordshire. I think it's providential, Pentecost and this easing of restrictions coming together, because the Feast of Pentecost is about us as a church, as a people, stepping out. It's that simple. They step out of the upper room into the streets of Jerusalem. And the question is, are we going back to what things were like before, or are we stepping forward into something new and unknown? That was the question for the disciples, and it's the same for us tomorrow on Happy Monday. I was thinking about this yesterday. Some of you here know I went for a walk on Saturday morning, just around the university campuses around Bloomsbury, up to King's Cross, back through Euston. Just a very nice, lazy walk. And on the one hand, my walk yesterday was partly about rediscovering familiar things and seeing them as if for the first time, noticing old things, appreciating them. Huge gratitude for many simple things that I'd taken for granted. The freedom just to walk around. That Gordon Square, just 1 block away, is open again after being closed for these 2 months. A tree near King's Cross with extraordinary leaves that I'd never seen before. Sitting on a bench to read the new novel I just downloaded onto my Kindle. The amazing architecture of Coal Drops Yard by that design studio of Thomas Heatherwick. The way the 2 ceilings touch like 2 circles. The people walking along the canal, saying hello to a man who was leaning out of his first floor window, looking at the passers-by, including me. These are simple things. That was my walk yesterday. I took for granted a year ago. And now it seems like a glimpse of heaven, just doing these ordinary things. So I hope that this will continue, but I'm afraid it might not. That the rush might take over and I'll lose the appreciation. G.K. Chesterton writes about this in his book Orthodoxy. He says the world is enchanted, not in a kind of magical way, but just that the beautiful, simple meaning of that word. We see the enchantment of the world as children, the wonder of every experience, of every object. This is built into the philosophy of Aristotle and then Aquinas, the wonder of being. But we lose the enchantment as we grow into adulthood. Everything seems dull and unexciting, and we need to re-enchant the world. Chesterton says this is what fairy tales do. Why do we need golden apples in fairy tales? To remind us of the wonder of real apples, which are much more wondrous, but we've forgotten about when we grew up. This is part of coming out of lockdown, re-enchanting the world. But the other experience I had yesterday was not familiarity, but unfamiliarity. I was in a new COVID-19 ready world. The signage, the security officers walking round, the marks on the floor, queues in places I didn't know there were places. The Waitrose at King's Cross, it says, please stand 2 meters apart in the queue. Everyone is standing 10 meters, and I'm wanting to say to them, that's longer than 2 meters, you know, relax. But then I think, no, this is the world we're in. People need to be careful. Pret-a-Manger was open. And I think, oh, I can get my first shop coffee in 2 months. But then I go into my English awkwardness mode. I'm there feeling socially discomforted. How do I queue? Do I need to put a mask on? How do I pay? Is that disposable cup they hand me going to be safe? But hang on, isn't it immoral to use disposable cups? Shouldn't I have my own reusable cup? Am I allowed to use them? My brain was frazzled at these terrifying thoughts of making a social faux pas, so I walked away without the coffee. I know I'm a coward, but it's just going out into the world and the strangeness of it. So it's an old world we need to be re-familiarized with, and a new world we need to understand and explore. And it was exactly the same for the disciples when they left the upper room. They were glad to go into the streets of Jerusalem, familiar buildings, places, sounds, to meet old friends. But they were going out as new people, filled with the Holy Spirit, united as a church. The fear they had just a few weeks ago has completely disappeared. They're filled with wisdom and courage and understanding and all the gifts of the Holy Spirit, with love and joy and peace, patience and kindness, and all the fruits that grow when we're open to the Holy Spirit. And above all, for them, life has a completely new purpose. I'm not exaggerating. All the beautiful things that gave life meaning before are still present now on day one in Jerusalem after Pentecost. Family, friends, relationship, work, faith, and on and on. But overlaying all of these things is a new purpose and a new mission, which is to speak about the marvels of God, to help others to know the love of Jesus Christ and the salvation he offers. Everything else fades into the background compared to this. It's true for them, and it's true for us today as a church, and for you as individuals, and for me. And especially as lockdown eases, to think again about what it means to live in this world and to live with and for others. Perhaps the most important line in the scriptures that we read today and heard today was in Acts, and it's this. The people of Jerusalem, not the Christians, the others, saying, we hear them speaking in our own languages the mighty works of God. If we are not sharing our faith in some way, if we're not helping people to know the love of God, everything else is in question. This is our purpose, our mission. It's not just for the priests or the sisters or the missionaries. It should be the motivating force in the life of every Christian and the criteria of discernment for all that you do and choose. Is this action or this decision helping others to get to heaven? And if it's not, at least not indirectly, what's the point of doing it? We hear them speaking in our own languages the mighty works of God. Notice carefully, the disciples are speaking in the languages of those around them. This is the gift of Pentecost. There's a great debate, maybe a bit technical for you, you're not interested in all this detail, but there's a great debate in the theology of mission, to sum up in 2 words, about the tension between proclaiming and explaining. If you're trying to do missionary work, do you proclaim, state, tell people in your language what you believe? The extreme of this is the person with the megaphone on the corner of Waterstones, preaching about Christianity, just shouting the message to the people around them. Or do you try and explain and translate into the language of the people that you're speaking to help them understand in their terms, to make sense of what they think and believe? And of course, both are important. That's the answer. St. Peter in Acts just goes into the street and starts speaking. He proclaims, he preaches. It's his language, his experiences, but he's connecting with his fellow Jews because they have the same scriptures and the same assumptions. But St. Paul in Acts chapter 17, later on, when he goes to Athens, quoting St. Paul here, I passed along and observed the objects of your worship. I found an altar with this description, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. You see what Paul's doing? He's seeing where these people are and what they understand, and speaking into that and helping to explain the gospel in terms that will make sense to them. We need both in our lives. Sometimes to explain, to listen, to understand, to see what questions people are asking, what their needs are, not to impose, not to be preachy or dogmatic. This is us following the example of many people in Christian history and in the Bible. But sometimes, equally, we need to take the risk of just saying what we believe in our language. This is important to me, and I want to share it with you. Some will understand, our sincerity hopefully will speak to them. Some of our language will connect with their language. In other words, don't wait until the perfect moment to speak, until you understand everything or they understand you. Sometimes we need to proclaim and witness. People need to learn to understand us as much as we need to learn to understand them. They're both important. This happened this morning on my radio at 9:50 this morning. I'm listening to Paddy, what's his name, on Broadcasting House on Radio 4, and they do the review of the newspapers. So there is, I don't know this woman, Swazi Macaulay. I think she's a presenter on BBC Sounds or something. There she is, commenting on the news, speaking about the terrible events and the violence in America, in Minneapolis. And she keeps saying something like, well, we hope, and we really pray that things get better. And I'm thinking, oh, that's an interesting word, to pray that things get better. And then she's asked, don't you think it's terrible that the young people in lockdown are missing out on so much that young people in the past have been able to do? They're missing out on life and experiences and the joy of being a young person. And Swazi says, I'm listening to this, she says, well, hang on. There's different ways of experiencing life. And she said today, almost in these very words, here we are on Sunday. Christians are celebrating Jesus Christ. He's the one who said, I've come that you may have life and have it to the full. And we've seen, this is her speaking still, we've seen in this lockdown how young people have been able to give their lives, like Jesus, for other people. and they found a depth and a meaning to life in giving to others and not just seeking experiences for themselves. Wow. This is Radio 4, not Premier Christian Radio. I was really moved, and she did it very naturally. It wasn't preachy, but she obviously thought this is a moment to say, hang on, there are different ways of living. And part of what, I'm guessing she was a Christian, maybe she isn't, part of what I believe is a Christian is that we discover life by serving and loving others, and I believe that because of my love for Jesus. And she had the nerve and the courage and the simplicity to do this on radio this morning. You're not radio presenters, but you can do something similar. Mostly you're waiting, you're witnessing quietly, you're explaining. But sometimes you're called to proclaim. And all I'd say is, like this wonderful woman, please go for it. Seize the day, as you might say, yea, Holy Spirit.